Sometimes the loudest moment of power is the one where someone says nothing at all. The voice begins as a crowded downtown square hums under late afternoon light, people moving shoulder to shoulder, phones in hand, conversations blending into a steady urban rhythm, and right in the middle of it, Officer Daniel Brooks steps forward with the kind of confidence that comes from wearing a badge too long without being questioned, his eyes locking onto a woman who stands out not because she demands attention, but because she doesn't. Naomi Carter stands still, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable, dressed simply, blending into the crowd like she belongs there just as much as anyone else, yet something about her presence unsettles him. Maybe it's the calm, maybe it's the way she doesn't react when he approaches. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside." His voice cuts through the noise, sharp enough that nearby conversations begin to fade, people turning, watching, sensing tension. Before understanding it, Naomi slowly turns her head, meeting his gaze without resistance, without fear, just a quiet awareness. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asks, her voice steady, almost soft, but Brooks doesn't hear the tone, he hears what he wants to hear, and that's defiance. "You fit a description," he replies, though his eyes say more than his words ever will, and just like that, the atmosphere shifts, the crowd tightens, phones rise subtly, recording, capturing, judging. Naomi doesn't move, doesn't argue, doesn't reach for anything, she simply stands there, letting the moment unfold, as if she's seen this before, as if she knows how it ends. Brooks steps closer, his presence filling the space, asserting control. "I'm going to need you to cooperate," he says, louder now, making sure the crowd hears it, making sure the narrative is already written in their minds, and for a second, just a second, Naomi's eyes flicker, not with fear, but with calculation. She glances past him, not at the people, but at the reflections in glass windows, at the angles of cameras, at the positioning of everything around her, like she's mapping something invisible, something bigger than this moment. "I am cooperating," she replies quietly, and that calm, that unshaken stillness, it only irritates him more, because power, the kind he understands, is supposed to be loud, reactive, obvious, not this controlled silence that refuses to bend. The murmurs grow louder now, strangers forming opinions, some sympathetic, some skeptical, all watching, all waiting, and Brooks, feeling the weight of their eyes, pushes further, his voice rising, his authority expanding to fill the space, while Naomi remains exactly where she is, grounded, composed, her breathing even, her gaze steady. And if you were standing there, if you were watching through your own screen, you might think this is just another moment, another misunderstanding, another story that ends the same way. But look closer, look at her eyes, look at the way she doesn't rush, doesn't panic, because deep beneath the surface of this ordinary scene, something is already in motion, something Brooks cannot see, something the crowd cannot imagine, and in just a few moments, everything they think they understand about power is going to change. The air around them tightens as Officer Brooks circles slightly, positioning himself so that Naomi is framed by the growing crowd, his movements deliberate, practiced, as if he has done this 100 times before and never once been questioned. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he says, louder now, making sure every phone pointed in their direction captures his authority. And Naomi does exactly that, slowly raising her hands just enough to comply, her fingers relaxed, her shoulders steady, not a trace of panic in her posture, and that is what unsettles him, because people in this situation are supposed to react, they are supposed to defend themselves, to argue, to show fear, but she does none of that. Instead, she watches him with a quiet focus that feels almost out of place, like she is observing rather than experiencing, like she is already somewhere beyond this moment. "You said I fit a description," she repeats calmly, her voice cutting through the murmurs around them. "What description is that?" And for a brief second, Brooks hesitates, not because he does not have an answer, but because the question forces him to define something he has not fully thought through, and that hesitation, small as it is, does not go unnoticed. A few people in the crowd exchange glances, the subtle shift of doubt beginning to ripple outward, but Brooks recovers quickly, straightening his stance, doubling down on the tone that has always worked for him. "I am asking the questions here," he snaps, stepping closer, closing the space between them as if proximity alone will re-establish control, and Naomi nods slightly, acknowledging his words without submitting to them, her eyes drifting for just a fraction of a second past his shoulder, catching the reflection of a darkened storefront window, where behind the layers of glass and movement, something barely visible flickers into place. A black vehicle turning the corner 3 blocks down, its presence subtle, almost invisible to anyone not looking for it, and then her gaze returns to him as if nothing has changed. "Of course," she says, her tone even, almost agreeable, but there is something underneath it now, something that feels like certainty rather than compliance, the kind of certainty that does not need to announce itself. Brooks notices it, even if he cannot explain it, and it irritates him more than open defiance ever could, because it suggests that she knows something he does not, and that is not a position he is used to being in. The crowd shifts again, the sound of distant traffic blending with the low hum of whispered conversations, phones still raised, recording every second, and Naomi's breathing remains steady, her focus unwavering, as if time itself has slowed for her, as if she is waiting, not reacting, waiting for something precise, something inevitable, and if you look closely, if you pay attention to the details the way she does, you might notice the faint outline of a small earpiece tucked just beneath her hair. Nearly invisible, nearly forgotten, but not inactive, not disconnected, because somewhere beyond the noise of this street, beyond the assumptions being made in real time, a different conversation is already unfolding, one that does not need to be heard to be understood, one that is already moving pieces into place while Officer Brooks continues to speak, unaware that the situation he believes he controls has already begun to slip beyond his reach. Officer Brooks shifts his weight, his patience thinning as Naomi's calm refuses to crack, and the silence between his commands grows heavier than the noise around them. "I am not going to repeat myself," he says, his voice sharper now, drawing a clear line between authority and what he believes is disobedience. But Naomi does not step back, does not argue, she simply lowers her hands slowly, deliberately, as if every movement is measured, every second accounted for, and there is something about the way she moves that begins to change the energy in the crowd, not dramatically, not all at once, but subtly, like a shift in the air before a storm. People who were once certain now hesitate, their whispers quieter, their eyes more focused, because something about this moment does not feel as simple as it first appeared, and Brooks senses it, even if he does not understand it, his gaze tightening as he studies her face, searching for the reaction he expects but cannot find. "You think this is a game?" he asks, but the question feels less like control and more like frustration, because control requires certainty, and certainty is beginning to slip. Naomi tilts her head just slightly, her expression unchanged, but her eyes hold his a second longer this time, steady, unshaken. "No," she answers softly. "I think this is exactly what it looks like." And for a moment, that answer hangs in the air, ambiguous, layered, forcing him to interpret it without guidance, forcing him to decide what it means, and that uncertainty only feeds his need to reassert dominance. He reaches for his radio, pressing it with a firm motion, calling in what he frames as routine, but the tone in his voice carries something else now, something tighter, something less confident than before. The response crackles back, normal, expected, yet Naomi's eyes flicker again, not to him, but past him, toward the far end of the street where the black vehicle from before has now slowed, blending into traffic so seamlessly that it disappears unless you are looking for it, and she is looking for it, her breathing still even, her posture still composed, as if this moment is unfolding exactly on schedule. "You are making this more difficult than it needs to be," Brooks continues, but the words feel rehearsed now, less effective, less certain, because the audience he once controlled is no longer fully on his side. A few people lower their phones, not because they are losing interest, but because they are watching more closely, trying to understand what is happening beneath the surface, and Naomi, standing at the center of it all, remains the only one who does not seem confused, her presence grounded, unwavering, like someone who knows the ending of a story no one else has read yet, and then, almost imperceptibly, she shifts her weight, a small adjustment, a step that aligns her with the street behind Brooks. her eyes lifting just enough to catch something new entering the frame, not fast, not loud, but precise, coordinated, and timed, the kind of movement that does not belong to chance. And in that moment, without raising her voice, without changing her expression, she speaks again, just loud enough for him to hear. "Officer," she says, her tone calm but certain, "you might want to listen very carefully to what happens next." And for the first time since this began, Brooks hesitates in a way that cannot be hidden, because something in her voice does not ask for control, it assumes it. The moment stretches thinner than anyone expects, like a thread pulled too tight, and for the first time the noise of the city does not fill the space between them, it fades, replaced by something quieter, heavier, as Officer Brooks lowers his radio slightly, his eyes narrowing, trying to read Naomi in a way he has not needed to read anyone before. "What is that supposed to mean?" he asks, but the edge in his voice is no longer just authority, it carries something unfamiliar, something closer to doubt, and Naomi does not rush to answer, she does not fill the silence for him, instead she lets it sit, lets it grow, because silence, when used correctly, can say more than any explanation ever could, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged, but now there is a subtle shift in the way she holds herself, not defensive, not reactive, but anchored, like someone who has already stepped beyond the outcome of this moment, and then it happens, not with sirens, not with urgency, but with precision. The first black vehicle comes to a quiet stop along the curb about 20 yards behind Brooks, its engine barely audible over the ambient noise. Most people do not notice it at first, because nothing about it demands attention, it simply exists, blending into the background like it belongs there. But Naomi notices, of course she does, her eyes flicking toward it for less than a second before returning to Brooks, and then a second vehicle follows, positioning itself just far enough apart to create a pattern, a structure, something intentional, and now a few people in the crowd begin to turn, their curiosity shifting direction. Their focus no longer entirely on Naomi, but on what is forming behind the officer. Brooks senses the change before he fully understands it, his shoulders tightening as he glances briefly over his own, just enough to register that something is different, something has entered his scene without his permission, and that alone disrupts the balance he thought he controlled. "Stay right there," he says quickly, turning back to Naomi as if reasserting the moment will restore it, but the command feels thinner now, less grounded, because the environment itself is no longer responding to him the way it did seconds ago. Naomi exhales slowly, her breath measured, her voice calm when she finally speaks. "I am exactly where I need to be," she says, and the certainty in her tone does not challenge him, it bypasses him entirely, and that is what unsettles him most, because it suggests that whatever is happening next does not require his approval. The doors of the first vehicle open almost in unison, not dramatically, not rushed, but with a quiet coordination that signals purpose. And as figures step out, dressed in plain, controlled attire that blends authority with anonymity, the energy in the crowd shifts again, this time unmistakably, phones lift higher, whispers turn sharper. Questions forming without answers, and Brooks turns fully now, his attention pulled away despite himself, his mind racing to categorize what he sees, to place it within the framework he understands. But nothing about this fits cleanly, nothing aligns with routine, and behind him, Naomi remains still, composed, watching not with surprise, but with recognition, as if the scene unfolding is not an interruption, but a continuation, a sequence already set in motion long before this moment began, and, as one of the approaching figures slows, their eyes locking on to Naomi with immediate clarity, the distance between assumption and reality begins to close, and Brooks, standing at the center of it, realizes too late that he is no longer the one defining what happens next. The shift is no longer subtle now, it is visible, undeniable, as the figures step forward with a quiet confidence that does not need to announce itself, their pace measured, their focus locked, not on the crowd, not on the cameras, but on Naomi. And that alone changes everything, because attention, real attention, reveals hierarchy faster than any badge ever could. Officer Brooks straightens instinctively, his posture tightening as he tries to reassert control over a moment that is clearly slipping. "This area is restricted," he says quickly, his voice raised just enough to sound authoritative again, but the words land differently now, thinner, less grounded, because the people approaching do not acknowledge him in the way he expects. They move past the boundary of his voice as if it does not exist, and that is when the first real fracture appears, a break not in action, but in perception, because the crowd sees it too. The way these individuals carry themselves, the way they ignore the command without hesitation, without consequence, and suddenly the question is no longer about Naomi, it is about him, about why his authority is not being recognized. Naomi remains still, her gaze following the lead figure as he closes the distance, her expression unchanged, but there is a quiet recognition in her eyes now, a confirmation, as if a signal has been received and understood. "Ma'am," the man says. As he stops a few feet away, his tone respectful, controlled, cutting through the noise without needing volume, and Brooks turns sharply, stepping between them, trying to reclaim the center of the scene. "I am handling this," he insists, but the man's attention does not shift, it stays on Naomi, unwavering, and that is the moment everything tilts, because being ignored in front of an audience is not just a disruption of authority, it is a collapse of it. Brooks feels it, even if he cannot process it yet, his voice tightening as he repeats himself, louder this time, but louder does not mean stronger, not here, not anymore. Naomi finally moves, not away, not back, but forward, just one step, subtle, controlled, enough to place herself clearly within the line of sight of the approaching team, and as she does, the smallest detail becomes impossible to ignore. The man in front of her straightens slightly. Not in reaction, but in recognition, a shift so precise it can only mean one thing: hierarchy has just been established, and it does not favor the officer standing in uniform. "You are making this more complicated than it needs to be," Naomi says quietly, her voice calm, but now it carries weight, not because it is louder, but because it aligns with what is unfolding around her. Brooks looks at her, really looks at her for the first time since this began, searching for something he missed, something that explains why everything around him is changing while she remains exactly the same, and then he notices it, not the obvious, not the crowd or the vehicles, but the details, the way the team positions themselves slightly behind her rather than around her, the way their attention does not scan for threats but centers on her presence, the way the moment itself seems to orbit her without her needing to move, and for the first time, doubt is no longer a passing feeling, it is a realization forming. Slow, uncomfortable, unavoidable, and Naomi, standing at the center of it all, does not raise her voice, does not explain, she simply holds his gaze and lets the truth arrive on its own. The realization does not arrive all at once for Officer Brooks, it builds piece by piece, detail by detail, like a structure forming in his mind that he cannot stop even if he wants to, his eyes moving from the man in front of him to the others now positioned with quiet precision, each of them maintaining a distance that is neither random nor defensive, but intentional, calculated, and most importantly, centered around Naomi, not him, never him. "I asked you to step back," Brooks says again, but this time his voice lacks the same certainty, the command sounding more like a request. Dressed in authority, and the lead figure finally shifts his attention, just slightly, enough to acknowledge the officer without yielding to him. "Officer," he replies, his tone calm, professional, but carrying a weight that does not come from volume. "This situation is no longer under your jurisdiction." And that word, jurisdiction, lands differently than anything else that has been said so far, because it does not challenge Brooks personally, it removes him structurally, it reframes the entire moment in a way that places him outside of it, and for a second, the crowd goes completely still, as if everyone is waiting to see how he responds, because this is the moment where authority is either reinforced or redefined. Brooks opens his mouth, ready to push back, ready to reclaim ground, but the words hesitate, caught between instinct and uncertainty, because something in the man's tone does not invite argument. It signals conclusion. Naomi watches him quietly, her expression unchanged, but her presence now feels different, not because she has moved, but because everything around her has shifted to reflect what she has been all along. "You should listen to him," she says softly, not as a warning, not as a threat, but as a statement of fact, And that is what makes it impossible to ignore, because facts do not need to be defended, they reveal themselves. Brooks looks at her again, searching, recalculating, and this time he sees more than he did before. He sees the alignment, the way the team does not question her position, the way their focus subtly adjusts with her smallest movements, the way the situation itself seems to stabilize around her presence, and suddenly, the memory of every second leading up to this moment replays in his mind with a different meaning. Her calm was not compliance. Her silence was not uncertainty, it was control, the kind of control that does not need to announce itself because it is already in effect. "Who are you?" he asks, the question quieter now, stripped of its earlier edge, and for the first time, Naomi takes a step closer, not to confront him, but to close the distance between misunderstanding and truth, her eyes meeting his. Directly, steady, unwavering, and when she speaks, her voice does not rise, it does not change, but it carries a clarity that cuts through everything else. "I am exactly who I need to be," she says, and before he can process the meaning, before he can respond, the lead figure reaches into his jacket and produces a badge, holding it just long enough for Brooks to see, not flashing it, not emphasizing it, simply presenting it as confirmation, and in that brief moment, everything that felt uncertain becomes undeniable, because some forms of authority do not need to be explained, they only need to be recognized, and as Brooks stands there, the weight of that recognition settles in, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely, because the moment he thought he controlled has already moved beyond him, and there is nothing left for him to command. The badge is only visible for a second, but it is enough, more than enough, because Officer Brooks does not need to read every detail to understand what it represents. His eyes fix on it, his posture stiffening as the weight of that single moment settles in, and suddenly the street does not feel like his anymore. The space he once controlled now feels observed, measured, and quietly redirected. "That is not possible," he says under his breath, not as a challenge, but as a reflex, as if denying. It might restore the balance he just lost, but the man in front of him does not respond with argument, he simply lowers the badge, his expression unchanged, because the truth does not require reinforcement, it only requires acknowledgement, and around them, the crowd begins to shift again, not with noise, but with understanding, the kind that spreads. Without being spoken, phones still raised, but now capturing something entirely different, not a confrontation, but a revelation unfolding in real time. Naomi stands exactly where she has been from the beginning, her presence unchanged, but now everything around her reflects what she has always been. Her silence no longer reads as passivity, it reads as control, and Brooks feels it, every second of it. The way the moment has turned without him, the way his authority no longer anchors the scene. He glances around, instinctively searching for support, for confirmation from the environment that once reinforced his position, but all he sees are unfamiliar faces, unfamiliar roles, a structure he does not belong to. "Why was I not informed?" he asks, the question directed at no one and everyone at the same time, because if this is real, if this situation extends beyond his scope, then there should have been a line, a notice, something that would have prevented him from stepping into it. Blindly, but no answer comes, not because there is none, but because the question itself no longer matters. Naomi takes another small step forward, closing the space just enough to bring clarity into focus, her voice calm when she speaks. "Because this was not meant to involve you," she says, and the simplicity of that statement carries more weight than any explanation could, because it reframes everything. This was never his situation to control, never his decision to make, he was not part of the plan, he was an interruption. And now that interruption is being corrected, Brooks exhales slowly, the tension in his shoulders no longer hidden, his mind replaying the sequence, every word, every action, now seen through a different lens, and the realization is not loud, it does not crash over him, it settles, steady and undeniable. Naomi turns her attention briefly to the team behind him, a subtle glance, a silent acknowledgement, and they respond without hesitation, adjusting their positions with quiet precision, the kind of coordination that does not need verbal commands. And that is when Brooks understands the final piece. This is not just authority, this is structure, this is a system. Already in motion, one that does not react, it operates, and he has stepped into it without knowing. So what happens now? He asks, the question no longer defensive, no longer resistant, but uncertain, because for the first time, he is not the one determining the outcome. Naomi meets his gaze one last time, her expression steady, her voice even. Now, she says, we restore what was never yours to control. And in that moment, the last illusion of power fades, not with force, not with conflict, but with clarity, because the truth does not need to overpower, it only needs to be seen. The words settle into the space between them, not loudly, not with force, but with a finality that cannot be ignored, and for a moment, everything slows, the city noise fading into the background as Officer Brooks stands there, caught between what he believed and what is now undeniable, his grip loosening, not physically, but mentally, the certainty that once guided every move now replaced with something unfamiliar. Something heavier, the understanding that he is no longer the one directing. This moment, the lead agent steps forward slightly, not aggressively, not confrontationally, but with quiet purpose, his attention still centered on Naomi as he speaks. Director Carter, the perimeter is secure. His tone measured, respectful, and that single phrase lands harder than anything else that has been said so far, because it removes all remaining ambiguity. It names her, defines her, places her exactly where she belongs within a structure Brooks cannot access, and around them, the reaction is immediate, subtle but undeniable. The crowd shifts again, whispers rising, phones adjusting, capturing not a question, but an answer. Naomi nods once, a small, controlled motion, acknowledging the update without ceremony, because this is not a reveal to her, it is simply the continuation of a process already in motion. Thank you, she replies, her voice calm, steady, as if she is speaking within a world that operates on a different set of rules, and in many ways she is. Brooks hears it all, every word, every tone, and the realization settles deeper, not as a sudden shock, but as a quiet collapse. Of everything he assumed, he looks at her differently now, not as a subject, not as someone to control, but as someone he failed to understand from the very beginning, and that failure is no longer theoretical, it is visible, recorded, witnessed. The crowd no longer sees him the same way, the shift in perception complete, irreversible. You should have identified yourself, he says finally, the words sounding less like an accusation and more like an attempt to make sense of what has happened. But Naomi's response is immediate, not defensive, not emotional, just clear. You did not ask the right questions, she says, and that answer reframes everything once again, because it places responsibility not on her silence, but on his assumptions. The moment hangs there, heavy with meaning, the kind that does not need to be explained further. The agents begin to reposition slightly, not closing in, not escalating, but transitioning, shifting the scene from confrontation to control, the kind that is structured, deliberate, and far beyond anything Brooks can interrupt. He takes a step back without realizing it, a subtle movement that says more than any words could, because it acknowledges the shift, accepts it, even if he does not fully understand it yet. Naomi turns her gaze briefly toward the crowd, her eyes scanning the faces, the phones, the witnesses, and for a brief second, there is something in her expression. Not anger, not satisfaction, but awareness, as if she understands exactly what this moment represents beyond herself, beyond him. And then she looks back at Brooks, her voice softer now, but no less certain. This was never about control, she says. It was about clarity. And as the words settle, the scene itself begins to change, not with noise, not with force, but with quiet precision, the kind that signals something larger is still unfolding, something not yet finished, something Brooks has only just begun to realize he is a part of, whether he intended to be or not. The movement around them continues, not rushed, not chaotic, but deliberate, as if every second has already been accounted for long before this moment began, and Officer Brooks feels it in a way he cannot explain, the sense that the situation is unfolding along a path he never saw, never questioned, and now cannot stop. The agents shift positions with quiet precision, forming a perimeter that does not isolate Naomi but instead reinforces her position at the center. their attention still anchored to her presence as if she is the fixed point everything else orbits around, and Brooks watches it happen. Not as the one directing it, but as someone standing just outside of something much larger than himself. "What is this operation?" he asks, his voice lower now, stripped of the authority it once carried, replaced by something closer to confusion, because the scene no longer fits within the boundaries he understands. The lead agent glances at him briefly, not dismissively, but without urgency, as if the question itself is secondary to what is already in motion. "You were not cleared for that information," he replies calmly, and the response does not escalate, it does not provoke, it simply closes a door Brooks did not realize he had already walked past. Naomi remains composed, her posture steady, but now her attention shifts slightly, not to the crowd, not to Brooks, but to something beyond the immediate scene, her gaze lifting just enough to signal awareness of another layer unfolding, and if you look closely, if you follow her line of sight, you might notice it too. The subtle presence of additional movement further down the street, unmarked, coordinated. Part of a larger structure that extends beyond what anyone here can fully see. "We are behind schedule," she says quietly, her tone measured, not urgent, but precise, and the team responds immediately, not with words, but with action, adjusting their positions, communicating through glances, through timing, through an understanding that does not require explanation. Brooks hears it, every word, and the realization deepens. This was never a random encounter, never a simple misunderstanding. This was something layered, something intentional, and he has stepped into it without knowing, without preparation, without the context needed to understand what he disrupted. The crowd senses it too, the shift from confrontation to coordination, the way the energy changes from uncertain to structured, and the phones that once captured tension now capture something else entirely, something quieter but far more significant. Naomi turns back toward Brooks one last time, her expression unchanged, but her presence now carries a clarity that cannot be ignored. "You were focused on control," she says softly, "but you never stopped to ask what you were interrupting." And that sentence lands with more weight than anything before it, because it reframes his role completely, not as the authority in this moment, but as the disruption within it. Brooks exhales slowly, his mind catching up to what has already happened, replaying every second with new understanding, and the silence that follows is not empty, it is full of realization, the kind that does not need to be spoken to be felt. The lead agent steps forward again, his tone calm but definitive. "We will take it from here," he says, and this time, there is no resistance, no attempt to reclaim ground, because there is nothing left to reclaim. The structure has already shifted, the outcome already determined, and Brooks, standing in the middle of it all, understands now that this moment was never his to define, only his to witness as it unfolded beyond him. The words, "We will take it from here," do not echo, they settle, and as they do, the entire scene begins to realign itself with quiet precision, not a single rush movement, not a raised voice, just a seamless shift of control from one structure to another, and Officer Brooks feels it more than he sees it, the way the attention of the crowd moves past him now, no longer anchored to his presence, no longer waiting for his direction, but drawn instead to Naomi and the team surrounding her, and that shift, subtle as it is, carries a weight that cannot be reversed. He steps back again, this time consciously, creating space not because he is told to, but because something inside him understands that the space is no longer his to occupy. Naomi turns slightly, her focus now fully aligned with the operation unfolding beyond him, her voice calm as she speaks. "Status update." And the response comes immediately, low, efficient. "Target movement confirmed 2 blocks east. Timing window is narrowing." And though the words are not meant for Brooks, he hears them, each one adding another layer to the realization forming in his mind. This was never just an encounter, never just a moment of misunderstanding. This is part of something ongoing, something strategic, something that was already in motion long before he arrived. Naomi nods once, absorbing the information without hesitation, her posture shifting almost imperceptibly from stillness to readiness, not tense, not reactive, but focused, like someone stepping into a role she has always held. "Adjust the perimeter," she says, her tone even, controlled, and the team moves instantly, not scrambling, not questioning, just executing, their positions evolving around her direction with a level of coordination that speaks to something deeper than simple training. Brooks watches it all, his mind trying to catch up, trying to place himself within what is happening, but there is no place for him here, no role to step into, no authority to reclaim. Only the understanding that he has been standing at the edge of something far larger than he realized. The crowd begins to thin slightly, not because they are told to leave, but because the energy has changed, the spectacle replaced by something more controlled, more contained. And the people who remain are no longer reacting, they are observing, sensing that what is happening now is not meant for them. Naomi takes a step forward, then another, moving past Brooks without hesitation, her presence no longer paused, no longer contained within the moment he created, but continuing forward along a path that was always hers, and as she passes him, she pauses just long enough to speak, not turning fully, not breaking stride. "Next time," she says quietly, "look beyond what you think you see." And then she continues, her focus already ahead, already aligned with the operation waiting for her. Brooks stands still, the words settling in a way that no command ever has, because they are not instructions, they are a reflection, and as the vehicles remain in place and the team continues their coordinated movement, he realizes that this moment is not ending, it is simply moving on without him, the structure intact, the mission continuing, and for the first time, he understands that authority is not about who speaks the loudest, or who steps forward first, but about who already knows where the moment is going before anyone else even realizes it has begun. The distance between them grows, not dramatically, not in a way that draws attention, but in the quiet, undeniable way that moments separate themselves when they are no longer connected, and Officer Brooks feels it as Naomi moves forward without looking back, her presence no longer tied to the scene he tried to control, but flowing seamlessly into something structured, something intentional, something that does not pause for disruption. The team aligns with her movement instantly, their formation adjusting as if guided by an invisible thread, each step measured, each position calculated, and for the first time, Brooks is not watching a situation unfold, he is watching a system operate, one that does not react to him, does not acknowledge him, because it was never built around him. He stands there, the noise of the city slowly returning, the rhythm of normal life attempting to fill the space left behind. But it does not feel the same, because he has seen something that cannot be unseen, the way authority can exist without announcement, the way control can be exercised without force, and most of all, the way assumptions can collapse without warning. He glances at the crowd, or what remains of it, the people who are still there now watching not with excitement, but with quiet understanding, their expressions different, more aware, as if they have witnessed something beyond a simple interaction. Something that shifts perspective rather than just attention. A few phones are still raised, but even those begin to lower, because the moment they were capturing has already passed, it has moved on, evolved into something they are no longer meant to follow. Brooks exhales slowly, the tension in his chest no longer sharp, but heavy, settled, like a realization that does not demand reaction, only acceptance. His radio crackles faintly at his side, a voice asking for an update, routine, familiar, grounded in the structure he understands, and for a second, he considers responding the way he always has, with certainty, with control, but the words do not come as easily now, because certainty has been replaced with something else, something more complex, more honest. "Situation is resolved," he says finally, but even that feels incomplete, because resolution suggests an ending, and what he just witnessed was not an ending, it was a continuation, something that did not stop when he stepped aside, something that was never dependent on him in the first place. He lowers the radio, his gaze drifting toward the direction Naomi and the team have moved, now just figures blending into the distance, their presence already becoming part of the city again, invisible to anyone not looking for them. And that is when it settles fully, the understanding that power is not always visible, not always declared. Sometimes it moves quietly, unnoticed, until the moment it needs to be seen, and by then, it is already too late to question it. Brooks stands there a moment longer, not out of hesitation, but out of reflection, the kind that does not come from instruction, but from experience, and as the last of the vehicles begins to pull away, merging back into the flow of traffic without drawing attention, the scene returns to what it was before, or at least it appears to, but for him, it will never look the same again, because now he knows that what you see is not always what is happening, and what you assume is not always what is true, and sometimes, the moment you think you are in control is the exact moment you have already lost it. The city begins to reclaim its rhythm, the hum of traffic rising again, footsteps blending into the sidewalks, conversations restarting as if nothing unusual had ever happened, and yet for Officer Brooks, everything feels altered in a way that cannot be undone. He remains standing in the same spot, but the ground beneath him no longer feels like a place of control, it feels like a place of reflection. A point where something shifted without permission, without warning, and without asking him to understand it first. His eyes drift once more toward the direction Naomi disappeared. Though she is no longer visible, her presence lingers in a different way now, not as a person in the scene, but as a realization that has taken root, something deeper than memory, something that reshapes how the moment is interpreted. The radio at his side crackles again. A second request for clarification, a voice expecting a report that fits within the familiar structure, and this time he answers more slowly, more carefully. "No further action required," he says, each word deliberate, measured, as if he is choosing not just what to say, but what to leave unsaid, because some moments cannot be translated into simple reports. Some things exist beyond the language of procedure. He lowers the radio again, his hand lingering there for a second longer than usual, and then he lets it fall back to his side, the weight of it unchanged, but the meaning behind it different. He begins to walk, not with urgency, not with purpose, but with a quiet awareness of each step, as if the act of moving forward requires a new kind of understanding, one that does not rely on assumption, one that does not rush to define what it sees. The crowd around him continues as normal, people passing by without recognition, without connection to what just unfolded. And that contrast stands out more than anything else, because something significant happened here. Something that shifted the balance of perception, and yet the world does not stop for it. It absorbs it, moves past it, leaves it behind for those who experienced it to carry on their own. Brooks glances at a reflective surface as he passes, catching a brief image of himself in motion, uniform intact, posture steady, everything appearing exactly as it was before. But he knows that is not true. Because the change did not happen on the outside, it happened in the way he now sees, the way he now questions, the way he now understands that not everything can be judged at a glance, not everything can be controlled by stepping forward and raising his voice. Some things require patience, awareness, the willingness to pause before acting, and as he continues down the street, the memory of Naomi's final words echoes quietly, not as a command, not as a correction, but as a reminder, one that does not fade with distance, one that stays, reshaping the way each new moment will be approached, because the lesson was never delivered with force, it was revealed through contrast. Through the undeniable difference between what he thought he knew and what actually existed beyond his view, and somewhere beyond the blocks he can see, the operation continues without interruption, without delay, exactly as it was meant to, moving forward with the same quiet precision, the same unseen structure, leaving behind only the realization that power does not always stand in front of you. Sometimes it passes right through your assumptions without ever needing to stop. By the time the sun begins to lower behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the same streets that held that moment only hours before, everything looks ordinary again, almost deceptively so, the sidewalks filled, the traffic steady, the rhythm of the city unchanged to anyone who was not there. But for Officer Brooks, the memory does not fade with the light, it sharpens, settling into something quieter. Something more permanent, not as a moment of embarrassment, not as a mistake to be dismissed, but as a shift, a recalibration of how he understands the world he moves through, because what happened was not loud, it was not chaotic, it did not leave behind broken pieces or visible consequences, it left behind something far more difficult to ignore, clarity, the kind that arrives without permission and stays without asking. He pauses at the edge of the same intersection, looking out over the flow of people. Each one moving with their own purpose, their own story, their own unseen layers, and for the first time, he does not assume he understands any of them at a glance. He does not reduce them to a moment, to a surface, to a single explanation, because now he knows better. Now he has seen what exists beneath the surface, the structures that move without being noticed, the authority that does not need to declare itself to be real, and the consequences of mistaking visibility for truth. Somewhere beyond his line of sight, Naomi continues forward, not thinking about the moment the way he does, not carrying it as a lesson, because for her, it was never a lesson, it was simply a step within a larger path, one that continues without pause, without hesitation, guided by purpose rather than reaction, and that contrast, that difference in perspective, is what stays with him the most, because it reveals something deeper than authority. It reveals understanding, the kind that does not come from standing above others, but from seeing beyond what is immediately in front of you. Brooks exhales slowly, the tension that once defined his posture replaced with something steadier, something more grounded, not weaker, but more aware, as if the weight he carries now is not about control, but about responsibility. The responsibility to see more clearly, to listen more carefully, to question what feels obvious before acting on it. And as he turns to walk away, blending back into the city that never stopped moving, the moment does not follow him as a shadow, it stays behind as a marker, a quiet reminder of the day he learned that power is not always where you expect it to be, that truth does not always introduce itself before it arrives, and that sometimes the person you think you are confronting is the one who has already seen the outcome long before you even understood the situation. And if there is anything that remains after everything else fades, it is this: he thought he was in control of the moment, but the moment was never his to control. It belonged to something larger, something quieter, something that did not need his permission to exist. And on that day, without raising her voice, without demanding attention, she did not just change the situation, she changed the way he would see every situation that came after it.